How did Islam begin in less than 15 minutes? Let us dive into a narrative full of teachings and transformative events. We travel to the ancient city of Mecca in Arabia, around the year 570, a time that marked the birth of a religion that would change the world. Mecca stood out for two main reasons. First, because of the presence of the Kaaba, a sacred place originally built as a space for worshiping the one true God. And second, because it was the birthplace of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. To understand his story, it is essential to speak of him with respect and reverence, as his life and mission are central to the message of Islam. Let us explore the events that shaped this religion. At that time, Mecca was a place where the law of the strongest prevailed. Security depended on the protection of a powerful family, as influential families controlled the economy and society according to their own interests. Sadly, the Kaaba was surrounded by 360 idols worshipped by the region's inhabitants, though these practices failed to provide the spiritual guidance people truly needed. In the midst of this environment, Muhammad, peace be upon him, grew up facing challenges from his childhood. He firmly believed in one God, known as Allah in Arabic, the same creator worshipped by Jews and Christians, who cannot be seen or represented through images. This pure and monotheistic belief was vastly different from the idolatrous practices of the time. Muhammad, peace be upon him, faced trials early in life. His father passed away before he was born, and his mother died when he was just 6 years old. He came under the care of his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, who protected and guided him during his early years. However, upon his grandfather's death, his uncle Abu Talib took on the responsibility of caring for him. Abu Talib, respected among Mecca's ruling families, ensured Muhammad's protection as he grew. Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, began his working life as a shepherd, tending to flocks. Later, he became involved in trade, traveling to buy and sell goods on behalf of wealthy merchants. His honesty, impeccable character, and exceptional skills earned him great respect among those who knew him. One of his clients was Khadija, a wealthy and noble widow. Impressed by his ethics and integrity, Khadija proposed marriage, and he accepted. This marriage marked a period of stability in the Prophet's life, although something much greater awaited him. Every year during the month of Ramadan, Mecca was filled with festivities around the Kaaba, which included sacrifices to idols, a practice that deeply displeased Muhammad, peace be upon him. Rejecting these traditions, he sought solace and connection with Allah by retreating into solitude. He often withdrew to the Cave of Hira, on a nearby mountain, where he meditated deeply and prayed to the one true God, seeking guidance and meaning. One pivotal night, while reflecting in the cave, an event occurred that would change human history. The angel Gabriel appeared before him with a divine message. Gabriel said, "Recite." Muhammad, peace be upon him, who was unlettered, humbly responded, "I do not know how to read." The angel embraced him forcefully and repeated the command, "Recite." This happened 3 times until Muhammad began to recite the words that Gabriel conveyed to him, memorizing them with precision. These words were not just a message, but the beginning of divine revelation. The message said, "Recite in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot. Recite, for your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man what he did not know." Surah Al-Alaq 96-15. This was the first message revealed by Allah, confirming Muhammad as his final prophet and continuing the chain of revelations that Allah had sent through earlier prophets, as mentioned in the sacred scriptures of Jews and Christians. These words were not a human invention, but the words of Allah, transmitted through his angel. From that moment on, revelations continued throughout Muhammad's, peace be upon him, life, forming what we now know as the Quran, a message for all humanity, and an eternal guide calling for the worship of Allah and the establishment of justice. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, recited the words revealed to him by Allah, and his companions, committed to preserving this divine message, wrote them on various materials. Decades later, during the Caliphate, these revelations were compiled into a single book, the Quran, which means recitation, reflecting the way they were conveyed by the Prophet. However, this process occurred long after the initial years of revelation. Let us return to the crucial moment when it all began, the night of power, Laylat al-Qadr. After receiving this first revelation, Muhammad, peace be upon him, began to share the divine message. He first conveyed it to his wife Khadijah, who was the first to believe in him, then to close friends like Abu Bakr, and gradually to others. He proclaimed the oneness of Allah, urging justice and equality among people. This message of faith and justice, however, disturbed the ruling families of Mecca, who preferred to maintain the oppressive system that granted them power and wealth. Islam means submission and obedience to Allah, while Muslim refers to one who lives in obedience to his will. This message challenged the power structures of Mecca by placing Allah as the sole authority worthy of obedience. This provoked strong resistance from the Quraysh leaders, who began to persecute the early Muslims. Many of them endured severe torture, and some were even killed for their faith. A group managed to emigrate to Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia, where they found refuge under the protection of a just king, but most remained in Mecca, facing harsh trials. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, also experienced moments of great difficulty. He lost his beloved wife, Khadijah, who had always been his greatest support, and shortly thereafter his uncle Abu Talib, who had protected him from his enemies. This period of sorrow and trials is known as the Year of Sadness. However, in the midst of this adversity, Allah granted him a miraculous experience that strengthened his spirit. The night journey, Al-Isra wal-Miraj. During this extraordinary event, the angel Gabriel appeared once again to accompany him on a celestial journey. Mounted on a majestic winged steed called Al-Barak, the Prophet was taken from the sacred mosque in Mecca to Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. There, Allah honored him by allowing him to lead the prayer with all the prophets sent to humanity. This symbolic act emphasized his position as the seal of the prophets and reaffirmed the continuity of the divine message. From Jerusalem, the Prophet ascended to the heavens, where he encountered Allah. During this celestial meeting, he was entrusted with a special mandate for his community, the obligation to perform 5 daily prayers. These prayers are not only an act of worship, but also a means to maintain a constant connection with Allah and to remember His greatness at all times. This journey, besides being a miracle, strengthened the Prophet and the Muslims, reminding them that despite difficulties, Allah is always with the believers and His guidance is unwavering. After this extraordinary experience, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, returned first to Jerusalem and then to Mecca. This event, known as the night journey, Al-Isra wal-Miraj, remains a source of reflection among Muslims. Some believe it was a physical journey, while others interpret it as a spiritual vision. Regardless of its nature, this event strengthened the Prophet at a critical moment, reaffirming his divine mission. However, soon after, the challenges for the Prophet and his followers increased. In a city north of Mecca called Yathrib, later known as Medina, some tribes heard the message of Islam. Fascinated by the justice and peace it promised, they invited the Prophet and his companions to settle among them, offering their protection. This invitation marked the beginning of a strategic plan for Muslims to leave Mecca and emigrate to Yathrib in search of safety. This historic journey is known as the Hijrah, migration. One by one, the Muslims undertook the dangerous journey across the desert, constantly risking being pursued by the rulers of Mecca, who saw their departure as a threat to their power. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and some of his closest followers remained in Mecca until ensuring that everyone else had escaped safely. Only then did they begin planning their own departure. However, Mecca's leaders conspired to stop him once and for all. They decided to send 7 young men from the most powerful families to attack his home at night and kill him. But Allah protected his messenger. When the attackers stormed the Prophet's house, they discovered he was not there. He had already escaped under divine guidance. Alerted to his escape, the Quraysh leaders sent expert trackers to pursue him. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his faithful companion Abu Bakr took a less obvious route to mislead their pursuers, cautiously traveling through the desert. Even so, the trackers drew closer and closer. In a moment of great danger, the Prophet and Abu Bakr sought refuge in a cave. They placed their complete trust in Allah and prayed fervently for protection. When the trackers reached the cave's entrance, something miraculous stopped them. They found an intact spider web covering the entrance, along with a bird's nest with fresh eggs. This made them conclude that no one could have recently entered the cave. Convinced, they retreated, leaving the Prophet and Abu Bakr safe, protected by Allah's will, manifested through a humble spider and a bird. Finally, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, arrived safely in Yathrib, which henceforth was known as Madinat al-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, and today simply as Medina. Although this was a significant moment for the Muslims, the challenges were far from over. In the years that followed, 3 major battles were fought between the Muslims and the Meccans. The first was the Battle of Badr, where, by Allah's permission, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and a group of 313 men achieved a miraculous victory against an army of 1,000 soldiers. This triumph, beyond strategy, was seen as a manifestation of divine support. However, the next major confrontation, the Battle of Uhud, was not as favorable for the Muslims. Some fighters disobeyed the Prophet's instructions and abandoned their positions to collect spoils from the enemy camp. This allowed Mecca's forces to exploit the situation and gain the upper hand, causing significant losses among the Muslims. The last major battle was the Battle of the Trench. Medina, naturally protected by mountains on 3 sides, was vulnerable through one open access. Faced with this threat, the Muslims, under the Prophet's guidance, dug a trench to fortify the city. This ingenious plan frustrated the Meccan forces, who could not cross it. While they camped, a storm with heavy rains and winds disrupted their efforts, forcing them to retreat without success. Over time, the repeated defeats began to weaken the influence of Mecca's ruling families. Many tribes, impressed by the resilience of the Muslims and the justice of Islam's message, began to join the faith. A peace treaty was signed in Hudaybiyah, but the Meccan families soon violated it, leading the Prophet to make a definitive decision. With an army of over 10,000 men, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, marched towards Mecca. Faced with the overwhelming force, the ruling families had no choice but to surrender. They feared reprisals, but the Prophet, in an act of mercy and forgiveness, proclaimed there would be no further bloodshed. He entered Mecca peacefully and proceeded to the Kaaba, the holiest site in Islam. There, he circumambulated the Kaaba 7 times, destroyed the idols surrounding it, and rededicated the sanctuary solely to Allah, the one true God. From that moment on, Muslims made it clear that they did not worship images or representations. There are no images of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to avoid any form of idolatry, nor representations of Allah, because his nature is beyond any likeness to creation. Thus began Islam, a message of faith, justice, and submission to Allah. What do you think of this incredible story?